Hello, this is Mike Enright, and welcome to Indoctrination versus Education. Everything goes better with humor. So this is a serious subject, but we're going to start out with some humor. Get ready to laugh as my daughter Amanda will read the captions to some cartoons.
Oh my God, I am delicious. I'm afraid I can't treat you, Mr. Fisk. I have a conflict of interest.
We need to define our terms. What is indoctrination? It's to teach someone to fully accept the ideas, opinions, and beliefs of a particular group and not consider others. Political parties and religions are examples of groups that use indoctrination. Education justifies its truth by an appeal to wisdom. The goal is liberation and autonomy. Indoctrination, on the other hand, justifies its opinion through sheer force of persuasion and coercion.
Indoctrination begins at an early age. I know nothing of hatred, intolerance, racism, sexism, bigotry, indoctrination, homophobia, and prejudice. I don't yet understand things like love, compassion, integrity, tolerance, human decency, and truth. For the first, most important formative years of my life, all I will know is what you teach me. Please choose wisely. One of the saddest lessons of history is this. If we've been bamboozled long enough, we tend to reject any evidence of the bamboozle. We're no longer interested in finding out the truth. The bamboozle has captured us. It's simply too painful to acknowledge, even to ourselves, that we've been taken. Once you give a charlatan power over you, you almost never get it back. Carl Sagan.
I'm very happy today because I get to challenge you and I get to teach, and I love teaching. The ancient Greeks said, an unexamined life is not worth living. So we're going to examine our life. We're going to examine whether or not we've been indoctrinated. Now don't be afraid, because as you discover how you've been indoctrinated, you'll gain a sense of liberation and freedom, and with it the joy that comes with it. We've developed many skills over the years, some related to sports, also music, art, computers, and human relations. We've learned these skills because of our unique brain. We're also able to learn critical thinking skills. We've been indoctrinated in 4 ways. The first is advertising. Think about this. How many advertisements are you exposed to on a daily basis? Get that number in mind. All right, you have that number? The answer is 20,000. 20,000 advertisements per day for each and every one of us. Think about that. What are you thinking? I hope you're thinking critically. Like, Mike, what's your source for this statistic? Well, I looked it up, and my source is the internet. So I know it's got to be true. Well, of course, we need critical thinking skills in all areas of our life, especially messages we get from the internet. I did some further research and found that Brigham Young University said the number is 3,000. The average American is exposed to 3,000 ads per day. Baylor University said, no, that number is 600 per day. Consumers Report said the number is 274 advertisements per day. That's over 9,000 advertisements a year and over 77 million in a lifetime. Almost all successful products use advertising. Look around your house, your garage, your refrigerator, your medicine cabinet. Almost all these products have been advertised. We've been indoctrinated to believe that these things are going to bring us success and warmth and happiness and acceptance. We're going to use some group participation. I'll say the first part of this commercial, you say the last part. You'll wonder where the yellow went when I heard you said when you brush your teeth with Pepsodent. This commercial has not been on television for over 60 years, yet most people over the age of 70 can remember it. It shows the power of advertising. Here's another one. I'll say the first part, you finish the statement. Winston tastes good like, oh, I heard you said, like a cigarette should. Most people over 70 get this right. It shows the power of advertising. Consumers Report says that we can save over $4,000 a year by buying off brands that are just as good in most cases. But most of us don't do that. The advertising creates a brand and a loyalty, and it fulfills psychological needs such as security, love, acceptance, and patriotism. The top 3 brands in America are first of all, Budweiser, a Belgian company that uses American patriotism to sell beer. Marlboro cigarettes. Even though the Marlboro Man hasn't been on television for 60 years, it still has a force. Another of the top 3 brands is Coca-Cola. This company has spent many years and billions of dollars in advertising, building its brand and loyalty. Even the top executives didn't understand what loyalty that Coca-Cola had. In 1984, Pepsi-Cola was gaining market share. They were increasing their sales and Coke was decreasing its sales because Pepsi was running a taste test which showed convincingly that Pepsi-Cola tasted better than Coca-Cola. The executives for Coca-Cola had to do something. They had to have a new Coke. And with great fanfare, in 1984, the new Coke was launched. Since it tasted better than Pepsi-Cola, you would think that Americans would love it. Not so. Because of loyalty and branding, they rejected the new Coke. They demonstrated against it. We had demonstrations not for civil rights or anti-war protests or anything like that, but for bringing back the old Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola executives were receiving 8,000 calls a day against the new Coke. They said, bring the old Coke back. And so Coca-Cola did that. With great fanfare, they reintroduced Coke Classic, and the new Coke disappeared quietly after a year. What harm can advertising do? Think about it. It's not just paying more for your products. It can create a sense of materialism that buying certain things will bring you happiness. And it can create a feeling that you're going to get fun and excitement from eating certain foods which may not be good for you. It creates obesity and other health problems. Think of how advertising has influenced your life. There's no escape from it, but now you have the power and can develop skills to analyze advertising. A second way that our society indoctrinates us is through politics. Now, despite all the things that have happened in the last few years, I'm not a cynical person. Sir Winston Churchill said it best. Democracy is the worst form of government, except for all the others. Despite that, politicians on the left and the right frequently use slogans to indoctrinate us rather than educate us. Example, from the left. Lyndon Johnson introduced the Great Society. Who could be against greatness for our society? We have also Harry Truman's program called The Fair Deal. Was it fair? Well, maybe it was and maybe it wasn't. But just labeling it the fair deal is a sign of indoctrination. They called Ronald Reagan's Strategic Defense Initiative Star Wars. What if John F. Kennedy had introduced this Strategic Defense Initiative? They wanted to marginalize it. They wanted to indoctrinate people against it. Maybe it was a good idea, maybe it was a bad idea. But labeling it as Star Wars creates a feeling and a method of indoctrination. Another one that Democrats use is Reaganomics. When America was in a recession and got out of that recession, reporters asked President Reagan how he knew we were out of that recession. And he replied, when people quit calling my policies Reaganomics. He had a point. They were trying to indoctrinate rather than educate. Another one Democrats use is Job Stimulus Act, proposed by President Barack Obama. Did it stimulate our economy? Well, I think it did, and it may have created some jobs. But labeling it the Job Stimulus Act is indoctrination. Another one that Democrats use is the word invest. They don't talk about taxes. They don't talk about spending. Those are harsh words. Taxes mean we'll have to pay more taxes to approve these measures. Instead, they use the word invest. Invest, that sounds like a warm and fuzzy word. Invest in our children. Invest in our environment. Invest in education. Investment. They avoid the argument of who's going to pay for it and what are the economic consequences of their programs. Republicans use indoctrination just as much as Democrats. Consider this. After the United States was attacked on September 11th, President Bush came out with a proposal that they labeled the Patriot Act. Was it a good idea? Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. But how, by labeling it Patriot Act, they were indoctrinating people. How could you be against something called the Patriot Act? Maybe it should have been called, let's trade our constitutional freedoms for more Security Act, because that's what it asks to do. But it's so much more convenient to use indoctrination rather than education. President Bush called his education proposal the No Child Left Behind Act. How could you be against that? How can you be against a poor urchin child saying everyone else is advancing and they're leaving me behind? Of course you might want to favor it just because of the label, but that's indoctrination. Maybe it should have been called the Let's Create More Government Bureaucracy and Burden Teachers with More Paperwork and hope that somehow test scores will succeed. But that's not so cute. That's not so glib. It's better to indoctrinate to get things across. Another slogan that Republicans have is the Right to Work Act. Oh, really? What does that mean? It means that people who work in a certain job don't have to pay union dues. So that will weaken unions and be better for businesses. So maybe it should have been called, let's get union pay without paying union dues jobs. Republicans were against same-sex marriage, so they came out with proposals called the Defense of Marriage Act. It doesn't talk about homosexuals or gay people. Instead, invites people to think that by limiting the rights of homosexuals, you're somehow defending marriage. Well, think about that. We've had the same-sex marriage for about 5 years. Are people getting divorced more often because of it? Is it destroying the family? Does it make things more difficult for married people? Of course not. Why? Because the Republicans used indoctrination by calling it the Defense of Marriage Act. Republicans also use the term death tax. It's really an inheritance tax. And there's a big limit that goes with it. But still, they wanted to call it, get support for it, not by calling it an inheritance tax, but by calling it a death tax. Conservative Republicans came up with a tax that they labeled a fair tax. It was actually getting rid of income taxes and corporate taxes and replacing it with an enormous sales tax. They didn't call it a sales tax though. They labeled it a fair tax. Was it fair? I don't think so. But whether you agree or disagree, consider that they were using indoctrination to try to push their proposal. Republicans also used indoctrination by calling President Obama's health care program Obamacare, blaming its difficulties on the president. Was it good for America? In some ways, yes. In some ways, no. But that's not the point. The point is, by labeling it Obamacare, they were using indoctrination. Indoctrination is all throughout our politics. Not every slogan is indoctrination. The Republicans came up with Contract with America. I think that's fine. That's not indoctrination. John F. Kennedy came up with the new frontier, and that's inspirational and not really indoctrination. We use several slogans to bypass thinking and come up with indoctrination, such as socialism doesn't work, left-wing media. We have to fight them over there or we fight them here. Guns don't kill people, people do. Support our troops. It's impossible for some people to get jobs. The government must help create jobs. Now you gain a greater sense of freedom when you hear politicians and hear them trying to indoctrinate. Now this can create greater autonomy and free thinking and being able to analyze programs from the left and the right, not on labels, but whether or not they actually make sense. A third way that society tries to indoctrinate people is through religion. Here's a statement. Our country was founded by God-fearing men. Really? Let's take a look at that. My daughter Amanda will read some quotes from our founding fathers about religion.
This would be the best of all possible worlds if there were no religion in it. John Adams. Millions of innocent men, women, and children, since the introduction of Christianity, have been burnt, tortured, fined, and imprisoned, yet we have not advanced 1 inch towards uniformity. Thomas Jefferson. Lighthouses are more helpful than churches. Benjamin Franklin. In the affairs of this world, men are saved not by faith, but by the lack of it. Benjamin Franklin. Of all the tyrannies that affect mankind, tyranny in religion is the worst. Thomas Paine.
A second way that religion tries to indoctrinate is through the statement, our country was founded on Judeo-Christian values. I heard that coming from Jerry Falwell, and a lot of religious leaders are fond of saying that. But I want you to think about that. What values was this country founded on? Well, first, democracy, a type of democracy called a republic, in which we vote for our elected leaders. Checks and balances, separation of powers, rights of the accused, no cruel or unusual punishment, and finally, lots of freedom. Freedom of religion and from religion, freedom of speech, press, peaceful assembly, and the right to petition our government. Are these ideas found in the Bible? No, they aren't. They're from secular writers, not religious writers, not from the Bible, not from any religious books. Our country, in fact, was founded on secular values, and that's why we've been so successful. A third way religion tries to indoctrinate is stressing faith over logic. Everyone has their story. The ancient Greeks believed that Zeus was the king of the Greek gods, and there were several gods and goddesses. Because they believed this otherwise very smart and progressive society offered sacrifices to Zeus. Crops, animals, and yes, humans. And this is what they indoctrinated their people to believe. Mormons indoctrinate with their story, Muslims indoctrinate, Hindus indoctrinate, and Christians indoctrinate with a story. And a reward punishment is set up. If you believe this story, you'll go to heaven. everlasting life and luxury and in joy. If you don't believe it, you're condemned to torture in hell for all eternity. This by a supposedly loving and peaceful God. Let's examine what works and what doesn't work. Ancient man had a life expectancy of about 30. That remained the same until the ancient Greeks started experimenting, and it went up a little bit. When the Greek society was destroyed and the Holy Roman Empire was developed and Christianity ruled, it went back to 30. Despite all the prayers of those people, it remained at 30 until modern medicine took effect. Modern medicine, not religion, has almost tripled life expectancy. This shows what works and what doesn't work.
I want you to have all the academic freedom you want, as long as you wind up saying the Bible account of creation is true and all others are not. Jerry Falwell.
Some religious people say it's important to have a religious education. Well, religious education is an oxymoron, because the goal of religion is not to educate, not to teach people how to analyze evidence and think for themselves. The goal of religion is to keep people in line. It's to keep people indoctrinated so they can continue to have power. A fourth way that our society tries to indoctrinate is through education. Paul Simon, in a song, said, "When I think back of all the crap I learned in high school, it's a wonder that I can think at all." Don't get me wrong, I love this country. I'm proud of its progress and achievements. I taught history for most of my 30 years in Bridgeport, Michigan. But our history is taught like one big, long infomercial in which America did all the right things, won all the wars, was morally right in ending those wars. And I love this country, but we should be able to analyze not just the good things that were done, but also the mistakes that were made so we can correct them. Amanda will read some quotes which shows the goal of education.
The capacity to learn is a gift. The ability to learn is a skill. The willingness to learn is a choice. Brian Herbert. The future of the world is in my classroom today. Ivan Welton Fitzwater. Children must be taught how to think, not what to think. Margaret Mead. Don't just teach your children to read. Teach them to question what they read. Teach them to question everything. George Carlin.
I'm going to show you something that's really hard to look at. Here you see a picture of a young Afghan girl who went to school, and as punishment for going to school, her nose and her ears were cut off. That's an outrageous thing. But those people that do that, the Taliban and ISIS and Al-Qaeda, have their followings. They have people who admire them. Wouldn't it be outrageous if they made that person who cut off this little girl's nose and ears, if they made that person a national hero? How about if schools were named after that person? How about if they had a national holiday? Who could imagine such a thing? Well, I want you to consider another person, Christopher Columbus. Columbus and his men, in order to intimidate the Indians, cut off their hands. They murdered some of them. They raped some of them. Yet we have a national holiday on Christopher Columbus's birthday. We have Columbus Day parades. Pity the poor politician who said, I'm not going to march in this parade. Columbus was a murderer. He wasn't a hero. He wasn't a good person. We Americans are so indoctrinated that we believe things even when they're obvious lies. There's a happy ending to this story. American doctors were able to reform this girl's nose and ears, and here you see the results. We do some good things sometimes, and we should be proud of it. I'm going to give you two examples of patriotism. One took place in the Villages, Florida, in one of the town squares, with an entertainer, a fine person, a good entertainer named Norman Lee. Well, this was the month of July. Not many people were dancing, not many people were paying attention. Norman had lost the crowd. But then he stepped forward and said into the microphone, ladies and gentlemen, do you love America? And the people cheered. He said, do you love this president? And since the president was George W. Bush, they cheered. Do you think America is a great country? And they cheered. And then this band broke into this Neil Diamond song, America. They're coming to America. And people got out and danced, and he used patriotism to capture the crowd. Have you ever seen this happen? A second example of citizenship and patriotism occurred about 30 years ago in Detroit, Michigan, with Amanda, our daughter adopted from Korea. She was 2 years old. She was dressed in red, white, and blue and was carrying an American flag, walking back and forth and saying to anyone who would listen, I'm going to be an American. Then the judge came in and reminded us how great this country was and how much we need immigrants to remind us of all the freedom and benefits and opportunity that we have. And then it was time to take the oath of citizenship. There were about 50 to 75 people in the audience. I picked Amanda up. With my voice breaking, I took the oath of citizenship on her behalf. When it was over, she melted into my arms and whispered, I am an American. This is my most patriotic moment. This was a moment that was special. Look, I love this country, and we don't need to indoctrinate. We can talk about our mistakes. Unlike Russia, China, and dozens of other countries, we should be free to talk about the harm that we've done sometimes and try to change that and make it better. We need to teach kids to think critically, to ask questions. We need to teach kids the good and bad of America and how we can make it better. We need to teach them the scientific method. We need to teach them the difference between science and pseudoscience. With that, they'll be better citizens and we'll have a better America.